Back from the dead.
Welcome to my guide to ranged brother builds for the Battle Brothers Legends mod. I'm the Indomitable Snowman, and hopefully this video can help you with your playthroughs of the Legends mod. Before we get into it, I have just a couple things to go through to make my explanations and this video a little easier to follow. Firstly, the basic disclaimer that these builds are all my own personal opinion and playstyle for this mod, so if you feel as though your builds are better or suit your playstyle more, that's perfectly okay. That being said, these builds are quite reliable and have served me well throughout my playthroughs of this mod. Some of these builds have also done well in previous versions of the mod too. But it almost goes without saying that you need good stats to make good builds, and we'll also touch on that. If you've watched my playthroughs, you will already know our love-hate relationship with dynamic perks and how it can be very hard to make consistent builds with inconsistent perks. This video is designed to help you work with the random perk generation of dynamic perks. However, these builds still even work even if you don't use dynamic perks. That being said, the randomness of dynamic perks isn't always kind, and the game will be different every time you play. Always remember to work with what you have and play to your strengths. A good example of this is choosing favorite enemy perks if you're aiming to hunt one type of enemy the entire playthrough, or building your brothers around the free perk you get with most Avatar and Lone Wolf type starts. Now personally, I value stats over perks, because if a brother has the best perks for a strong build, but can't hit the broadside of a barn, or take more than 2 arrows to the face, I see that brother as useless and he won't survive till late game. But if a brother is only missing 1 or 2 important perks, but has the stats to keep up with the other strong brothers in my party, I'll definitely see him as a useful brother. However, it goes without saying that if you have both the stats and the perks, you are set for success. Moving on to an important statement. The builds in this video are designed around essential perks, which are the core of the build. These builds will not function without these perks. If you only have access to these green core perks, you will still be very effective. Recommended perks are very valuable perks to flesh out the build and make it stronger by supporting the core perks. Optional perks are just there in case you have a perk point to spend and didn't get lucky enough with recommended perks, or to unlock a new tier of perks. Extra perk options also help if you get your brothers past level 11 and pick up more perk points. The final point I need to make is that all these builds and any future adjustments or iterations of them can be found on my personal spreadsheet that is linked in the description. Overall, I hope the spreadsheet and this video can help you with building brothers in your own playthroughs. Now let's get into it. We'll be working on ranged brothers today and ranged builds. The most important thing to make sure is that you have good stats before committing to a late game build on your brothers. The main thing to look out for on ranged brothers, unsurprisingly, is a high range attack stat and stars. If you have brothers with a bit lower range attack, you can look to slinger builds as one of the first perks you get on a slinger build is plus 12 flat range attack. If you have insanely high range attack, I recommend looking to a gunner build as they need it a little bit more. Range defense and fatigue are secondary stats and stars to these builds. They are very helpful but not as important as the ranged attack. Most of our builds will aim to have a minimum of 90 range attack at level 11 to be able to hit most things in the game reliably. Obviously, shielded enemies, high range defense enemies like goblins will also be a slight struggle for ranged characters, but these stats will ensure you have a good fighting chance. Now, if you're not used to calculating the stats of your newly recruited victims, brothers, you can use the Battle Brothers wiki to help you get used to how the stats work when leveling up. Since range attack is our most important stat, we want to have at least a minimum of 45 range attack at level 1 with 3 stars, 50 at level 1 with 2 stars, 55 with 1 star, or 60 with no stars, to hopefully roll an average stat roll of 90 minimum range attack at level 11. I personally aim for higher than 90, 1, because like most of you, I love high stats, and 2, because RNG is always against me, and if the brothers roll low as well, they can still hit over that 90 minimum if we aim for higher than that. The blue range defense numbers over there are just to show you how easy it is to get a minimum of 30 range defense at level 11, even if you have no stars. 60 HP is a good benchmark to not get one shot by a stray crossbow bolt without nimble, And 80 usable fatigue is just a nice number. You don't usually need this much or much more than this, because you'll always run recover and wear light armor with these builds. Now, the first build we'll go through is the basic bow sniper build that uses only bows and nothing else. This build is a good economy ranged role in your party that can dish out some good long distance damage. It provides reliable and accurate range damage, but lacks a bit of versatility as it can struggle against enemies that are heavily armored, have high range defense, or are using shields. The only reason I run this basic bow sniper build is if I don't have enough perks for a better build. It's as simple as that. The core of this build works with 3 easy to find perks: Recover, Bullseye, and Bow Mastery. Recover is there because you'll run out of fatigue fast, and it's the only way of keeping up with medium to long fights. Bullseye is a must because squishy targets like hiding behind cover, and your bow is your only weapon, so you need all the help you can get to snipe those enemies. Bow Mastery gives reduced fatigue, and is a nice +1 range to your arrows, which definitely helps your sniping. Finally, Nimble is a core perk because RNG is always against you, and a stray lucky hit or flank will ruin your day, and Nimble allows you to take a few unlucky hits per fight. With only 4 perks being essential, this economy build allows you to try and grab more damage, utility, accuracy, or defense for whatever perks you have available. I am a sucker for student and gifted, and where possible I will try and add them to my builds. I cannot say that they are valuable enough to be core or essential perks, but they are very much recommended. They are some of the best stat-related perks in the game, and they allow you to get those stats faster through levels. Windreader is in the same category for rangers, and it allows you to fuel your range attack when you increase your range defense. Finally, the last recommended we have available is Anticipation, one of the best range defense perks. Now, since we didn't have all the recommended perks available on this brother, we look to the optional perk list and see that we can take Footwork as a good get-out-of-jail-free ability if we ever get jumped. But now you're wondering and probably asking the question, "Hey, Mr. Snowman, you only have 9 perks on the screen. How is that a complete brother there?" And you are right. He is not complete, and there's still one more perk he can take at level 11 because Student is a perk that refunds itself at level 11. And this guy here is a good example of the bad side of dynamic perks, where you can find brothers that have very limited perks that don't help you very much when you're trying to make certain builds. In this situation, just use your head and choose a perk that works for your team or what enemies you're fighting. This guy could use either fast adaptation to increase his accuracy, or maybe quick hands to switch when he runs out of arrows, or even a stash increase because it'll give some extra fatigue for him as well. All these are good choices, but not ones I'd normally take if the previous options are available, because these builds are already slimmed down to highlight the core and more important perks to take. But through your travels, you will come across poor sods like this brother, who has limited perks for whatever you're wanting him to be, and you'll just have to do what you think is best for your team. Right, now we'll move to build number 2, also with a need for a minimum of 90 range attack. The bow throw build is the one I prefer more, and is the upgrade to the bow sniper build that we just went over. This build is more versatile as it allows us to snipe easy targets from afar, as well as using throwing weapons to bypass heavily armored targets and decimate their HP up close. However, as good as that sounds, it does require more core perks, which means it's harder to build than the economy bow sniper build. Recover, Bullseye, Bow Mastery, and Nimble are all the same as before and are all just as important in this build. We now add Throwing Mastery for the reduced fatigue and increased throwing damage. Quick Hands allows us to save time on switching between long and short range, and helps us refill our hands with throwing weapons. And finally, Duelist is the big perk that allows us our throwing weapons, to punch through armored enemies. With the core of this build needing 7 essential perks, there is less freedom with the rest of your choices. I don't see this to be a problem for our more demanding builds because of the stronger damage and versatility payoff. With this particular brother, we can't take Student or Gifted, so I've chosen Windreader for the lovely extra range attack stats. I've also taken Anticipation as one of the strongest defensives, and finally Killing Frenzy as a strong, reliable damage increase as long as you're killing someone every other turn. However, as you can see, there are still other recommended perks we could have taken, like Berserk or Piercing Shot. Maybe you're fighting enemies with high numbers like goblins and you'd benefit more from Piercing Shot. At the end of the day, the choice is yours. With these high core perk builds, you'll rarely get to the optional perks, so as usual, they're just here in case you need them. The next build utilizes slings. As stated before, slingers don't need as much range attack at level 1 and can get to the 90 minimum with less effort. So if we go back to the stats just quickly, because the slinger spins provides you with plus 12 boost to range attack, you can still produce good late game ranged brothers that have weaker level 1 stats. Utilizing the slinger builds, you can afford to take weaker brothers or utilize bad stat rolls on brothers without having to dump them on the wayside and think they're useless. The Slinger Sniper build uses only a sling and requires 6 core perks to be effective, but surprisingly, it is the economy build for slingers. It fills a solid range roll in your party that can pack some good long distance damage, especially for those brothers who might have rolled a bit bad on their stats. It provides reliable and accurate damage that can last indefinitely in fights because it'll never run out of ammo. The only real weakness of this build is very similar to the bow sniper, is that it lacks versatility when fighting heavily armored foes, but it still is good to have the sling build because you can get lucky headshots which give you a free daze, which is always nice. The core of this build works with the 3 slinger perks that buff sling accuracy, range, and damage. Recover is there because, as usual, you'll run out of fatigue fast, and it's our only way of keeping up with medium to long fights. Bullseye is more helpful than you think, when your sling is your only weapon and the AI always hides its squishy targets behind cover. And finally, Nimble is the core perk that ensures RNG has a harder time of ruining your fun. Even with 6 core perks, we still have some room to add some more damage, accuracy, utility, or survival with our recommended perks. As usual, I love Student and Gifted to get those juicy stats quicker. Windreader is in the same category of providing good stats as well. Anticipation is never a bad defensive pick. And we still have 1 perk left as this brother has no more recommended, sadly. Finally, we grab Footwork, and it's a nice defensive perk in case we get rushed. For those with Deja Vu, this is the same brother I used to demonstrate the bow sniper, so since he has potential to be both builds, and you can choose whichever one you want, he has quite the versatility there. Personally, I choose most builds on stats. If he had good stats, I'd lean towards bow, but if he had bad stats, he'd really have to go with the sling to keep up with everyone else. But it's always good to have options to play the way you want to. We'll move on to build 4 now, which needs the usual 90 range attack minimum. And as you guessed it, it is the throwing upgrade to the Slinger Sniper build. It is the Sling Throw build, the stronger version of the Sniper build. Adding to the throwing weapons, we allow our Slinger to be heavily effective against heavily armored targets. As usual, requires more core perks and is harder to build than the Economy Slinger Sniper build. The 3 sling perks, as usual, Bullseye and Nimble are all the same as before and just as important in this build. Now we add Throwing Mastery to fully utilize the throwing weapons, Quick Hands saves us time on switching weapons, and finally Duelist to destroy armored enemies within our reach by using our throwing weapons. Now you gotta love Student and Gifted, and well, that's all the perks we get. This is a 9 core perk build, and we'll have very little variation in how we build it. And yes, we almost never see the optional perks in this build, but they're here just in case. 9 core perks seems really hard to get, but you'd be surprised on how easy it is to find most of these perks, even with dynamic perks turned on. I guess Duelist and Nimble are sort of the harder ones to find if you're ever struggling. Okay, on to the next build, which only needs a minimum of 80 range attack. Getting to 80 range is a little bit easier, so the next build, just like with slings, we can use brothers with lower range attack. This is our only throw build that we showcased in our Assassin playthrough. It is reliable, but definitely limited by being a close combat archer who is most effective at a distance of 2 tiles from the enemy, 1 tile in between. The damage fall off at a distance is painful, and I only made this build because we had no other options with the stats and the perks on that specific brother. However, This brother's build still packs a devastating punch to enemies that stray too close, and can be thought of as the polar opposite to our sniper builds. This build is kind of economy, as it's not that hard to make, but the main thing with this build is that it's a last resort type build, and you should only use this build if you don't get any other ranged perks on a ranged character. Now to the perks. Bags and belts allows you to have enough ammo to survive a long fight. Recover is needed because throwing weapons definitely drain your fatigue. Quick hands saves time and you'll be reloading weapons often. Throwing mastery and duelist, you already know, are essential to your throwing damage. Nimble to stay alive, but now there's a new perk we haven't touched on yet. Close combat archer is a unique perk that basically makes this build a terror on the battlefield. Being able to increase your damage by a percentage of your range defense is insane. As an example, our minimum requirement of 30 range defense will increase our damage by 30% to anyone we hit within 2 tiles of us. Pretty solid indeed. Being another 7-core perk build, the options are a little bit limited, but you really want to focus damage here, as deleting enemies will be making up for the time wasted to get close to them. The usual student and gifted here is great. Anticipation isn't super needed, but can be nice indeed. However, double strike is one of the strongest damage buff perks available, and can allow you to two-shot late game humans if you roll high on damage. Optionals are here just in case. However, Colossus is a valuable optional perk, as you'll be spending all of your time super close to enemies. Now, we move on to our last two builds, which I recommend you give to the highest range stat brothers on your team. The higher the better in every case, but here especially. We're aiming for over 100 range attack, which means you'll definitely need good stars and hopefully good rolls too. You may have guessed it, but if not, here are the gunner builds. First gunner build here is the economy build, which in reality is still very hard to build because bags and belts isn't easy to find, and getting all these perks at the same time is quite tricky. This build is my favorite way to build gunners, as it allows you to utilize less core perks, and it gives you more versatility to increase your damage or survivability, or even allow you to go as an alternative fearsome gunner with or without mind over body. Going through the perks, recover as usual to keep us through longer engagements. Rebound is okay, but recover is usually better. Fast adaptation used to be broken for guns because it used to register the empty spaces as a miss. Unfortunately, they fixed that, but it still can provide a strong boost when hitting multiple targets. Bags and belts to hold more ammo, and your crossbow. Quick hands is a lifesaver in this build since you only attack once a turn. It allows you to never stop attacking unless you have to move a lot. Crossbow mastery is a given, fatigue reduction, and allows you to shoot the gun every turn. Make sure you rush this perk. Nimble, as always, keeps you alive. The recommended perks are almost in line with normal ranged builds, but Feint is a new one that works rather well with fast adaptation and AoE. I definitely recommend it. Windreader is just great, and Anticipation is nice to have even if we're going to be closer to the enemy when using the gun. Surprisingly enough, Berserk is not useful in this build, and is down here in the optionals. Firing once a turn and with high action point costs, its usefulness isn't very high. However, Colossus is just a good perk on any brother you have, and it will be good on this one too. Our final build, we're going to need the high range attack again once we're doing another gun build. The usual numbers to help you with getting such high range attack. And here it is. Technically the hardest ranged build to make, as it requires 8 core perks, with most of these perks being very rare and hard to find. At least all in the same person. The gun throw build is the more advanced version of the crossbow gun build, that allows you to use throwing weapons to melt tanky opponents when needed. I prefer the crossbow gun build, but that's just me. This build is still very strong as well. The same core gunner perks are needed here just like last time, including recover, fast adaptation, quick hands, crossbow mastery, and nimble. Bags and belts isn't a gun exclusive perk, but allows for secondary weapons like the crossbow before, or allows for throwing weapons like in this build. At least to hold more of them. As with the throwing builds you've seen before, we will need Duelist and Throwing Mastery to make sure we do the best damage possible with them. And yes, just like the other Gunner build, you can go Fearsome and Mind Over Body here too if you want to, only if you win the perk jackpot and have them all available on the same character, making that a 10 core perk build, which is the hardest way to do it. But if you get lucky, go for it. Being a gunner and having this as an 8 core perk build, there's not much use and not much space for extra perks, but it really comes down to what you need. Double Strike is a great choice because we're using throwing weapons and allows us to maximize that damage, or you can do what this brother's got here and have Wind Raider and Anticipation to help with accuracy and defense. Optionals are the usual again, almost never used, but still there if you need them. Just before we go to the final notes, I just want to put all the builds side by side and rate them, mainly because different builds will perform better than others in late game. The 2 sniper builds are economy style builds that you can work well within the late game. The only problem is their lack of killing power against heavily armored targets, and that really pushes their utility towards being a supportive damage or as an anti-archer sort of build. This is okay though, you can still easily have a good game with only sniper builds. But if you get lucky with more perks, you can build brothers that can snipe and throw javelins, and then you can be able to handle those heavily armored fights a lot more easily. The only throw build is in the same field as the snipers, as it is an economy build that shines against armored targets, but is abysmal at range, so I do not recommend you use it often, unless you always fight melee enemies. Once again, the only throw build can do well into late game, but it's better if you get lucky with a different ranged weapon and get better perks with it. The gunner builds both provide good area damage, but they mainly branch off to either being more effective at ranged with the crossbow, or more effective against close armored targets with the throwing weapons. I enjoy the crossbow gun build a bit more, so my gunner can help my archers in the fight at range, but both are very solid, hard to make builds. Overall, the main trick with ranged brothers is just make sure you have good enough stats, and then choose your builds from the perks availables, or if you have bad stats, just go with the slinger. Now, some final closing notes to keep in the back of your mind. Don't forget the Legends mod is still in beta, and just like the most recent update, perks changes can happen, and they may open or close doors to these builds. However, the core essential perks in these builds will most likely not change. Please do check out my other guides and builds. If this video helped, hopefully my other ones will too. When playing Battle Brothers, nothing is ever simple and static. Cookie cutter builds will not succeed every time you play the game, so make sure you try your own builds every now and again, and remember to build for the situation you are playing in. But most importantly, remember to have fun. Maximizing stats and perfecting builds isn't everyone's cup of tea, and just like me, at the end of the day, you're here to have fun. Finally, don't forget that my spreadsheet has all this info on it, so you can easily access the builds at any time and be able to keep up with any changes I make in the future. Many thanks for watching till the end. I hope that I've been able to help, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye!